The call came at 6:47 in the morning, and I almost didn't pick up because I didn't recognize the number. It was a nurse from St. Michael's Hospital in downtown Toronto. She said my father-in-law had been brought in 3 days earlier by a neighbor who found him on the front step in the November cold, confused, and unable to remember his own address. 3 days. And nobody in his family had called to ask where he was. I want to be clear about something. I had been divorced from his son for almost 2 years by then. I had no legal obligation, no moral debt, no reason at all to be the one who answered that call. The nurse found my number because it was still listed as an emergency contact in his GP's file, something nobody had ever bothered to update after the divorce. I almost said I wasn't family anymore. Almost. But then she said, very quietly, that he had been asking for someone named Joanna, and Joanna is my name. My father-in-law's name is Bernard Kowalski, though most people who know him call him Bern. He came to Canada from Poland in 1981 with $40, a suitcase, and the kind of stubbornness that either gets a person killed or builds them something worth leaving behind. He built something. A small landscaping company in Mississauga, 3 trucks, 12 employees at its peak, a house he owned outright by the time he was 52. He was proud in the way men of that generation are proud, quietly, through work, through not asking for help, through pressing his lips together when something hurt. When I married his son, my ex-husband, Bern and I had a complicated relationship at first. He was suspicious of me the way fathers sometimes are suspicious of the women their sons bring home. I was 27, I had opinions, I didn't back down easily. He respected that eventually, I think. We found a rhythm. Sunday dinners. He taught me how to make bigos. I helped him write emails when his English got tangled. It wasn't closeness exactly, but it was something real. The divorce changed everything, and not in the ways I expected. My ex-husband moved on quickly. Within 6 months he was living with someone new, a woman named Tiffany who wore her hair in a high ponytail and smiled with all her teeth all the time. I bore her no ill will. I bore my ex-husband very little ill will either, honestly. We had just stopped fitting together, like furniture from 2 different rooms that looked fine in theory but felt wrong once you tried to arrange it. What I didn't expect was how completely I would be erased from the family. Not gradually. All at once. The Sunday dinners stopped. Bern's number went quiet. My ex-husband's sister, who I had genuinely liked, stopped responding to texts. I told myself it was natural. Loyalties settle. People pick sides even when there are no sides to pick. I stopped thinking about it. I built a different life. I had a good job in healthcare administration, a small apartment in the annex neighborhood, friends, routine. A cat named Harold who had strong opinions about breakfast time. And then the nurse called. Estraint. Michael's is a 15-minute drive from where I live, but I sat in the hospital parking garage for almost 10 minutes before I got out of the car. I kept asking myself what I thought I was doing. He had a son. He had a daughter-in-law. He had family who were not me. But he had asked for Joanna. I found him in a room on the 4th floor, 2 beds, the curtain half drawn. He was sitting up but not really looking at anything, his hands resting on the blanket, loose and uncertain. He had lost weight since I'd seen him last. His hair, which he'd always kept neatly combed back, was flat on one side like he'd been sleeping against the pillow for days. He turned when he heard me come in, and something shifted in his face. Not surprise exactly. More like relief, which was somehow worse. Joanna, he said. Hi, Bern. He looked at me for a long moment. You came, he said, like he hadn't been sure I would. Like he'd been waiting long enough that he'd started to doubt it. I pulled the chair close and sat down. There were no flowers in the room, no cards on the windowsill. The whiteboard on the wall had his name, his nurse's name, the date he'd been admitted. Nobody had written anything else on it. Nobody had brought anything personal to make the room feel less like a room. I asked him what the doctors said. He shrugged the way he always shrugged, that particular Eastern European shrug that meant he'd been told something and decided to dispute it internally. Something with his heart, he said. Not the heart itself, something around it. Fluid. They were adjusting his medications. He would probably be there another week. Did anyone call? I asked Kara a moment. My son called, he said. He's very busy right now. They have a trip to Mexico, Byrne said. It was already planned. He said this with a kind of careful neutrality, like he was reciting something he'd rehearsed, like he'd practiced not letting his face do what his face wanted to do. I didn't say anything. I sat with him until visiting hours ended. I came back the next day and the day after that. I brought things, a proper pillow from home because the hospital ones are flat, his favorite brand of tea because the hospital only had orange Peiko, a Polish sports magazine I found at a shop on Roncesvalles. At first he was embarrassed by this. He kept saying I didn't have to. I had my own life, he didn't want to be a burden. I told him to stop it, that it was just tea, and eventually he did stop it. His mind was sharp most days. But some mornings I'd arrive and he would be somewhere else. Not confused exactly. More like he was watching the room from a slight distance. Like he'd pulled himself back from the glass. On those days we didn't talk much. I just sat. That seemed to be enough. It was on a Thursday, maybe the second week, that his clarity came back different. Not just clear, sharp. Focused in a way that felt almost urgent. He waited until the nurse had left the room. Then he looked at me directly, the way he used to look when he was about to say something he'd been holding on to for a while. They took my power of attorney, he said. I went still. What do you mean, Byrne? He exhaled, slowly, like he was measuring out what he could say and how much. My son came here 2 days before you did. With her, they had papers. They said it was for my protection in case I got worse, so someone could make decisions for me. And you signed? He shook his head. I told them I wanted to read it first, to take it to my own lawyer. He paused. They said my lawyer was old-fashioned, that this was the modern way, that I was being difficult. His jaw tightened slightly. I know when I am being managed, Joanna. I was a business owner for 31 years. I know that feeling. What happened? Upset. My son said I was being ungrateful. He pressed his lips together in that old way. They're coming back. I can feel it. I drove home that night, thinking about what he'd said. I didn't sleep much. In the morning, I called a colleague who works in elder law. Not a full consultation, just a conversation. She told me what to watch for. She used words like undue influence and capacity assessment, and substitute decision maker. And the more she talked, the colder I got. The following Tuesday, I arrived at the hospital 20 minutes earlier than usual. The door to Byrne's room was open. I heard the voices before I reached it. My ex-husband's voice, measured and low, the way it gets when he's trying to be persuasive. And Tiffany's voice underneath his, quick and impatient. I stopped just outside. Just put your initials here, Dad, my ex-husband was saying. This one just authorizes us to speak to the doctors on your behalf. It's not complicated. Byrne's voice was weaker than I'd heard it. I don't understand what this section means. You don't need to understand every section. That's what lawyers are for. Just initial here. Then Tiffany. Byrne, we've been over this 3 times. You're holding up the process. Something about the phrase holding up the process made my chest go tight. Like he was an inconvenience in paperwork. Like his confusion about what he was signing was a scheduling problem. I pushed the door open. Both of them turned. My ex-husband's face did the thing it used to do when I caught him off guard. A flicker of something real, then a door closing behind it. Joanna, his voice was carefully neutral. What are you doing here? I looked past him to Byrne, who was holding the papers with the uncertain grip of someone who had been asked to sign them too many times. Then I looked at the papers themselves. I'd like to see those, I said. My ex-husband pulled them back slightly. This is a family matter. I know what a family matter is, I said. But from where I'm standing, you're asking a man who just had a cardiac event to initial a legal document without counsel, so I'd like to see them. Tiffany made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. She's not even family anymore. Why is she even here? I didn't look at her. Byrne, I said. Do you want me to stay? He didn't hesitate. Yes, he said. The room went quiet in a particular way. I pulled a chair close and sat beside him. I kept my voice even. What documents are these, exactly? My ex-husband exhaled. It's a general PO standard for his care decisions. Who prepared it? A pause. We used an online service. I looked at the papers. I'm not a lawyer, but I'd done enough administrative work in healthcare to recognize what I was looking at, and it was not a standard care PO. There was language in there about financial assets, about property management, about a Mississauga address I recognized as Burns' house. You need to stop, I said. And I said it the way you say something when you're not asking. My ex-husband's voice hardened. You don't have any authority here, Joanna. No, I said. But he does, and he's not signing this today. The silence that followed was the kind that meant something had shifted, and everyone in the room knew it. They left. I sat with Byrne for a long time after. He was tired, not just physically. The other kind of tired, the kind that comes from realizing something about a person you made. I'm sorry, he said after a while. Don't be, I said. He was looking at his hands. I kept thinking. I thought after the divorce I would lose you. He paused. But I lost my son before that. I didn't know what to say to that. So I didn't say anything. I just stayed. The next morning I called my colleague back. This time it was a real consultation. She explained the process clearly. Given Byrne's recent hospitalization, if anyone sought legal authority over his finances or property, a capacity assessment could be requested. If he was found capable, which she believed he was, based on what I described, then any document signed under pressure or without independent legal advice could be challenged. Furthermore, financial exploitation of a vulnerable person is a serious matter in Ontario. The Adult Protective Services branch of the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services takes reports like this. I want to be careful, I told her. I don't want to make things worse for him. Protecting him isn't making things worse, she said. I made 2 phone calls that afternoon. One to the hospital's patient advocate. One to a clinic in Brampton that offered a free elder law consultation. I also left a note with the nursing staff, gently, matter-of-factly, asking that any external documents brought to Byrne for signature be flagged before he signed them. The charge nurse looked at me when I said that. She looked at me in the way that meant she had already noticed something. He doesn't get many visitors, she said. I know, I said. My ex-husband came back 4 days later, alone this time. No Tiffany, no papers. He found me in the hallway outside Byrne's room, and he looked at me the way he used to look when he was too proud to ask for something directly. You really need to stay out of this, he said. I thought about that. I thought about Byrne sitting in a hospital room for 3 days before anyone looked for him. I thought about the flat pillow and the blank whiteboard and the word Joanna coming out of his mouth the moment he saw a familiar face. I'm not going anywhere, I said. He laughed, a short, tight sound. You always had to be the person who fixes everything, even things that aren't yours. I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, he asked for me. Nobody else called. So I came. My ex-husband didn't say anything else. He walked past me and went into the room. I heard his voice inside, lower and softer than it had been with the papers. I don't know what they said to each other. That wasn't mine to hear. 3 weeks after Byrne was discharged, I drove him to an appointment at a law firm on Bay Street. A real one, with a meeting room and a pot of decent coffee, and a lawyer who spoke slowly and made sure Byrne understood every sentence before moving to the next one. Byrne had asked me to come with him, not because he needed me to speak for him. He made that clear. He's a man who doesn't like to need things. But because, he said, he wanted a witness he trusted. In that meeting room, Byrne executed a new power of attorney for personal care and a separate one for property. He named me as his attorney of record for personal care. For property, he named a trust company, neutral, professional, no conflict of interest. He also updated his will with his lawyer, who had handled his affairs for years, and who, when she heard the situation, went quiet in a way that told me she had suspected something was wrong for a while. Afterward, we sat in a Tim Hortons on King Street and Byrne ordered a double-double and a butter tart and said very little for a while. Then he said, I was ashamed. About the hospital, about how long I sat there. You don't have anything to be ashamed of, I said. He shook his head slightly. Not ashamed that I needed help. He paused. Ashamed that I was afraid if I made trouble, they would stop coming altogether. I thought about that for a while. About how a person can be so afraid of being abandoned that they accept almost anything to prevent it, even knowing the thing they're accepting is wrong. They weren't really coming anyway, I said quietly. Not to see you. I know, he said. He looked out the window at the street. I knew. My ex-husband called me once, about a month later. He didn't yell. He was quiet in a way that was almost worse. He said I had interfered in a family matter, that what he'd been doing was for his father's benefit, that I had no idea how much stress they'd been under managing his affairs from a distance. I listened. I let him finish. Then I said, your father sat alone in a hospital for 3 days in November. He doesn't have your number in his phone anymore. He told me he was afraid to ask for things because he didn't want to lose you. And what he almost lost was his house and his savings and the right to make his own decisions. So no. I don't think what you were doing was for his benefit. He hung up. I put my phone down and sat with that for a minute. It didn't feel like winning. It didn't feel like losing either. It felt like something hard and real. The kind of thing that doesn't resolve cleanly no matter how the paperwork turns out. Byrne is back in his house now, the one he paid off 20 years ago, on the income from 3 landscaping trucks and the kind of work ethic that doesn't have a word for it in English. He has a PSW who comes 3 mornings a week, arranged through the Elgin, and a neighbor 2 doors down who keeps an eye on things and who Byrne has taken to feeding soup in exchange. He calls me on Sunday evenings, usually around 7. Sometimes we talk for an hour. Sometimes it's 10 minutes and mostly silence, the comfortable kind, the kind between people who don't need to perform anything for each other. Last month, he asked me to come for dinner. He made bigos, the real kind, with 3 types of meat, and the sauerkraut he buys from a Polish deli on Roncesvalles. We ate at his kitchen table, the same table I'd eaten at dozens of times when I was still married, and it looked exactly the same. The same plastic placemat, the same salt shaker, shaped like a lighthouse that I'd always meant to ask about. Afterward, over tea, he reached into the pocket of his cardigan. He set something on the table between us. A small envelope, cream-colored, my name written on it in his handwriting. He said, I wrote this in the hospital. In the first week, when I didn't know yet if anyone was coming, I looked at the envelope. I didn't pick it up right away, he said. Read it later if you want, or don't. I just wanted you to have it. I took it home and I sat with it for a long time before I opened it. I'm not going to write here what it said because it was his words and they belong to him, and some things aren't meant to be summarized. But I will say that when I finally read it, I understood something I hadn't fully understood before. That what I had shown up for, in that hospital room, on that ordinary Tuesday in November, wasn't just him. It was the version of myself that still believed some things were worth doing even when nobody was watching. Even when it cost something. Even when it wasn't mine, maybe especially then.